tonight I wanted to do something a bit different. I wanted to talk about my first astral projection experience again. Part of this is because I've noticed, I know I don't talk about it very much on this channel, but I've noticed that I have gone past 300 subscribers. And one of the first things I wanted to do is say thank you to each and every one of you who took a moment to subscribe to my channel. Again, I know that I don't talk about it a lot. My feeling is that I'm reaching the number of people I'm supposed to be reaching, and that hopefully the numbers will increase with time. That's all I can really do, and I guess in a sense, trust my guides, trust my guidance in this way. But I wanted to take a moment to thank you. While 300 subscribers is still a pretty small amount on YouTube, for me, it is tremendous. It's huge. I went from just a few people subscribed to my channel to over 300, and that to me is absolutely amazing. So thank you so much. I really, truly do appreciate it. So I think that was a big part of me wanting to revisit this. Another thing is that, I still see that there are people that have fear when it comes to astral projection. This is completely understandable. We fear what we don't understand. And that is another reason why I wanted to go through this with you again, is because I wanted to show you that despite the fact that I've been doing astral projection for so many years, since I was 9 years old, now I'm over 50. And even so, even with all this time, yeah, sometimes I'm afraid with certain things, but I don't allow that fear in that moment to deter me. Instead, I take a breath and I really sit down to examine and hopefully to understand what that experience was, with the knowledge that my guides wouldn't allow things to happen to me that would hurt me in any way, that they're there protecting me and they won't allow anything through. Remember I kind of compared guides to almost a bouncer in a club. With a bouncer in a club, they go through everybody to make sure that, there aren't any weapons, or, this person isn't going to be a threat in the club necessarily, especially to clubs that are really tightly controlled. And I would say that guides are kind of along that same thing. They're kind of like bouncers, and they won't allow anything into that or beyond that sphere of protection unless they feel that you can learn something from it. So this is the understanding that, it's taken me many years to really come to this point, but I wanted to share with you. And I think through sharing my first time again, for those of you who are afraid, again, it'll give you sort of a look at what happened to me in my first time, and knowing that, well, it was quite terrifying. So let's get into it. The first person that exposed me to astral projection, or spoke to me about astral projection, was a childhood friend by the name of John. Now, most of you may think that perhaps because I've had such communication with my mother, and my mother understands many of these things, that she exposed me to this. And in fact, what's so interesting is that she had an experience when I was young. So she had had astral projection experiences, and that may be actually where I get it from, but she had never told me about it. And I believe, knowing my mother, that the reason she didn't was she wanted me to find my own path, whether it be to going into traditional religion or other things. So she did not introduce me to it. And it was interesting because when we had talked about it later, I don't know, it was just a fascinating thing that she had had experiences, and now I was having experiences, and now I was telling her this. And wow, she didn't introduce me to it. So it was this kid by the name of John, and we were childhood friends, as I said, and we used to play and do all those different things. And I remember once I was over at his house, I was in his room, and he was telling me about astral projection. Now, when he first told me about it, even then, I mean, I have to tell you, again, for those of you who have listened to this channel since the very beginning, you'll know that I'm a pretty practical person in many ways. And it's difficult for me to believe certain things. When he told me about it in the beginning, I'll be honest with you, I did not believe that astral projection was possible. I didn't. Even at that age, even, you're at the age where you believe in Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy or the Easter Bunny or whatever when you're really young. And for me, I just thought, nah, I just don't think that this is possible. He had told me about an experience that he had where he had left his body and he was floating and he saw a hole in the wall of his apartment where obviously in the 3D world there was no hole, and he went through that hole, that tunnel, to explore. And again, after he had told me about it initially, I listened to what he had to say. It sounded fascinating, kind of interesting to me, but it did to me sound as if maybe he was making it up. I'm not sure. And I just said, okay. He had also told me at that time about imagining a white light around you, that was one of the things that you did when you astral projected. Again, I didn't know at that time what the significance of a white light around you meant, but it was in my mind. And although I didn't know that I necessarily believed everything that was said to me, I was still like, well, I don't know, it wouldn't hurt to actually try it. I was at least that open to see if it was actually possible. So that night when I went home, I didn't have any thoughts that anything was going to actually happen. You know, it's so funny when amazing things happen, we have sometimes, many times, no idea right before that amazing thing is going to happen. Everything seems normal. Everything seems like, you know, that day seemed like every other day. I was just going to go to bed. I think it was a school night, maybe even. And I went to bed on school nights. I'll always remember my time to go to bed was around 9 o'clock at night. And that's probably around the time that I went to bed that evening. And I laid down and I remember, I shut my eyes and I just laid there. And somewhere in my imagination, I had pictured this, image of me in bed with a white light around me. That's all. Very simple picture. I was just thinking about that, but it was kind of in the back of my mind and nothing was happening. Sometimes it was so funny. One of the things that John had told me was that you might feel a tingling sensation all around you, and I thought, well, I'm sitting and imagining this and I don't feel anything. These are all thoughts in my mind. And I'm sitting here thinking this as a kid. I'm thinking, I don't feel anything. I don't believe this. So I just, started to go to sleep. And at one point it clicked. That in-between state came. And I didn't understand it. I honestly didn't, because in the moment that that in-between state came, my body felt like there was energy coursing through it. It was that tingling sensation that John had talked about. It wasn't exactly how I think I would have imagined it. To me, it felt like, that feeling where if you don't put bounce in a dryer with your clothes and you get that static electricity feeling, it felt like static electricity, and it felt like it was all through my body, but it was much more powerful, much more powerful. And suddenly I felt myself begin to rise. Now, at this point, I have to tell you that I did not open my third eye. And I think the reason I didn't was because I was terrified. I was so scared. But in the beginning, it was that deer in the headlights kind of fear. And I'm not exactly sure why I wasn't yanked right back in at that moment. Because normally fear will do that. But I kept rising up. And maybe it was that sense of still kind of disbelief too. There was definitely a fear. I have to tell you, there was a fear that was rising in me as my soul was rising out of my body. My fear was rising, but at the same time, there was this sense of disbelief. There were all these thoughts that were going through my mind, like, am I dreaming this? No, I'm not dreaming this. And again, I have to stress this. This was all in darkness. I could feel the sensation of leaving my body, but I was too afraid to look. I was too afraid to turn on my third eye to be able to see what was actually happening to me. I was absolutely terrified, my goodness. And as I rose higher and higher, the higher I rose, the more I panicked. At one point, I hit the ceiling. And I always think of it like hitting the ceiling like a balloon that filled with helium would hit the ceiling and rest against it. That's what I felt like. I felt like a balloon that was against the ceiling. Now, I did not penetrate the ceiling at that point, and it's interesting. As a spirit being, I probably should have gone through the ceiling, but I think even then, my guides who have known me since the very beginning, they thought that perhaps that would be a little too much for me to handle in that moment, and they didn't allow me to go through the ceiling. Thank goodness they didn't. That would really, really have freaked me out. Instead, I remember I was against the ceiling, while my face, my front was against the ceiling, and then I flipped around and I started flailing my arms like a drowning man. Like literally, I was like, it was as if I was drowning. I was panicking. At this point, it had reached a point that I was like, oh my God. And I even felt as if I was trying to scream, but the scream was muffled. It was a very strange thing. It was, I suppose it might be equivalent to if you tried to scream and you were underwater. There wouldn't really be a sound, or you would hear something like, I don't know, you wouldn't really hear a sound. But I did hear a sound, which was so interesting. I did hear a sound. There was something there, but it was very muffled. And so after doing this for a while, it probably wasn't very long. It seemed to me to be a very long time. Finally, I stopped, and I remember at one point that I felt something like a cord, or I imagined that I felt a cord, or I had touched a cord, or put my arm, my hand around a cord, And then I released it and I thought, okay, I'm still in my mind. I thought I'm still attached to my body. Something is still attaching me to my body. So I'm not okay. I'm not going to float away. I haven't died. Everything's okay. And after floating there for a few moments, suddenly I felt as if a force yanked me down and I plummeted. It was, oh my gosh. It was like I was falling from, almost like I was falling from a skyscraper or something. I mean, it was just this fall. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to hit the bed. And then, bam, I opened my eyes. I looked around and I thought, wow, what was that? Now, just to let you know, it took me time to really come to the realization that this was astral projection. Not only that, it took me having experiences that were consistent. And at that point, I realized that there was something there. And, well, that's how it all really, truly began for me. The last thing I want to really kind of tell you again is that those of you who are afraid, number one, feel free to comment or to tell me about it, to tell me about what your fears are, the things that you're afraid of for doing this. It's okay. It's okay to be afraid. It is also okay, as I've said before, if you don't want to do this because of those fears. I don't take anything away from anyone who feels that way. It's completely understandable. But for those of you who truly want to make the journey, for those of you who are willing to go out there and explore, the only thing I can tell you is you, I believe, will discover astonishing things, amazing things, and it may even change your life. It certainly did for me. Anyway, thank you so much for coming on another journey with me. And until next time, take care.